The structural choice still haunting banks. Long before the most recent crises, before emergency facilities became routine, and before stability itself required constant reinforcement, a structural decision was made that quietly reshaped how American banking would respond to risk, growth, and failure for generations. Even though almost no one recognized it as decisive at the time, this choice did not feel dramatic. It felt practical. It felt reasonable. And that is precisely why its consequences have been so persistent. To understand why modern banking now struggles to balance resilience with dependence, we need to return to the moment when flexibility was traded for control and diversity was traded for coordination, because that same trade-off continues to define how the system absorbs stress today. In the early design of American banking, structure was intentional. Institutions were fragmented. Responsibilities were distributed. Failure was meant to remain localized rather than contagious. This design was inefficient. It was uneven. It was often unstable. But it had one powerful advantage. When mistakes occurred, they were absorbed by distance. When excess formed, it did not spread instantly. When institutions failed, the system learned quickly. Over time, this messiness became politically and economically uncomfortable. Crises demanded response. Markets demanded reassurance. Uniformity began to feel safer than diversity. So the structure began to change. Coordination increased. Standards unified. Oversight centralized. Each step felt like progress. Each adjustment reduced visible instability. Each reform promised control. But structure shapes behavior, and behavior reshapes risk. As institutions aligned more closely, differences faded. Strategies converged. Responses synchronized. What once moved independently now moved together. This alignment delivered calm, but it also removed insulation. Stress no longer dissipated naturally. It traveled. The system became easier to manage, but harder to correct, more predictable in normal times, but more sensitive during transition. This was the structural choice. Not a single law or rule, but a direction, a preference for order over adaptability, for coordination over diversity. At the time, it felt like maturity, like evolution, like safety. Only later would it become clear that the choice had not removed fragility. It had relocated it, and that relocation is still shaping how American banking behaves today. Once this structural direction was set, its influence spread steadily through every layer of the banking system, not as a single sweeping reform, but as a series of reinforcing decisions that gradually reshaped incentives, expectations, and behavior until coordination was no longer just a feature of the system, but its defining condition. Banks adapted first. Alignment reduced uncertainty. Shared standards simplified decision-making. Operating within a coordinated framework felt safer than navigating independence. Regulators adapted as well. Oversight became centralized. Responses became uniform. Stability was managed from the top rather than emerging from the bottom. This brought immediate benefits. Crises were contained more quickly. Markets recovered faster. Confidence returned with greater predictability. But these successes carried hidden effects. Diversity declined. Different business models began responding to the same signals. Independent judgment gave way to shared assumptions. Risk no longer formed in isolation. It formed through similarity, through alignment, through common exposure. The system began behaving like a single organism. When conditions were favorable, it moved efficiently. When conditions shifted, it reacted all at once. Local adjustment became harder. Regional variation mattered less. Deviation felt risky, even when it was prudent. Over time, coordination reshaped culture. Institutions planned around collective response. Risk management assumed intervention. Resilience was measured by access, not insulation. The structure also changed accountability. When outcomes were shared, responsibility blurred. No single decision appeared decisive. No single institution appeared culpable. This made correction more difficult. Without clear signals, reform slowed. Without visible failure, urgency faded. The system grew calmer. But calm became conditional, dependent on continued coordination, dependent on alignment holding under stress. What once absorbed shocks through difference now transmitted them through similarity. The very structure designed to manage risk was reshaping how risk accumulated. This was the cost of the structural choice. Not immediate failure, but a gradual narrowing of options, a system increasingly strong in appearance, yet increasingly sensitive beneath the surface. And that sensitivity would only become visible when coordination itself was tested. The conflict surfaced when the system began encountering moments that demanded flexibility rather than coordination, revealing how deeply the structural choice had constrained the ability of institutions to respond differently, independently, and creatively when conditions no longer followed familiar patterns. As stress emerged, banks did not lack tools. They lacked options. Responses were available, but they were largely the same everywhere. Institutions reacted according to shared frameworks, shared assumptions, and shared expectations about how stress should be handled, which meant that what looked like prudent behavior in isolation became destabilizing once repeated simultaneously across the system. Liquidity was drawn at the same time. Assets were adjusted in parallel. Risk was reduced using identical strategies. What should have been diversification became synchronization. This alignment magnified pressure. Markets absorbed waves rather than ripples. Signals intensified instead of dissipating. Adjustment accelerated beyond control. Regulators faced their own dilemma. The structure they oversaw worked well during calm, but under stress, it offered few alternatives. Intervention had to be broad. Because the system had become unified, targeted correction was difficult. Local restraint mattered less. Isolated failure risked contagion. Every action carried systemic consequence. As a result, responses grew larger, faster, more decisive. Support expanded to maintain alignment, but each intervention reinforced the same structure. Coordination was preserved. Divergence was discouraged. The system learned that deviation increased risk. This feedback loop narrowed behavior further. Banks optimized for how the system would respond, not for how their own exposures might behave. Resilience shifted from internal strength to external expectation. The system still functioned. Payments cleared. Markets reopened. Confidence returned. But beneath that surface, tension accumulated. Flexibility eroded. Options disappeared. The conflict was no longer theoretical. A structure designed to create order was limiting adaptation. A system built to manage risk was struggling to adjust to change. What had once been a strength, the ability to move together, was becoming a vulnerability, and the cost of reversing that choice was growing with every coordinated response. The climax arrived when it became impossible to ignore that the system's greatest strength and greatest weakness were now the same thing. The realization that coordination, once chosen to tame chaos and restore confidence, had gradually narrowed the system's ability to adapt when conditions demanded divergence rather than unity. Banks were no longer failing because they lacked safeguards. They were struggling because they lacked room to behave differently. Every response followed a familiar path. Every adjustment reinforced the same pattern. When stress appeared, the system moved as one. Support expanded. Liquidity flowed. Confidence was preserved. And once again, collapse was avoided. But avoidance came with a cost. Each coordinated rescue confirmed that alignment was essential. Each successful intervention discouraged experimentation. Each calm outcome reduced tolerance for disorder. The structure left little space for learning through difference. Failure was managed, not explored. Variation was smoothed, not examined. Signals were muted before they could inform change. This made fragility harder to detect. Risk no longer announced itself through isolated mistakes. It accumulated through sameness, through shared exposure, through synchronized behavior. The structural choice had delivered stability, but it had also made stability dependent on constant reinforcement. The system no longer corrected itself naturally. It required guidance. The resolution is not about undoing coordination entirely. Modern banking cannot return to fragmentation. Scale and integration are realities that cannot be reversed. The lesson is about balance. Coordination must coexist with diversity. Control must leave room for judgment. Stability must allow discomfort before it demands intervention. A system that moves only together cannot adjust smoothly. It can only stop or surge. American banking now lives with the consequences of that choice. Managed, resilient, and efficient, yet increasingly sensitive to moments of change. The structural choice still haunts banks, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too completely. The